I am Liz Powell, and I am the founder and CEO of G2G Consulting, which stands for Government to Growth. I get to kick things off today. We have an amazing lineup of speakers. We're going to share all kinds of insights so that you can be fully prepared to participate in MHSRS. Next slide, please. So my job is to just go over the agenda, what we're going to cover today, and then give a little bit of background on G2G, and then I will pass it over to my colleagues. So this is what we're going to cover, and we're super excited. We've got Lloyd Rose to speak today. He's going to share really valuable insights. We have known Lloyd many years. He is one of our most valuable colleagues that we work with within the Department of Defense. Next slide, please. So it's always good to start off with some background. I know some of you know me well, and some of you do not. So a little bit of an introduction. Again, Liz Powell, the founder of G2G Consulting. I formerly worked on Capitol Hill as a legislative director, and I staffed a lot of health issues, health policy issues. And then I staffed the Small Business Committee and the Armed Services Committee. So I learned all the different pathways for funding, collaboration with Department of Defense, and that many of the health challenges that are faced in the civilian population are faced in the military. And most of our innovation, or an awful lot of it, starts in the military, at least with military funding. So it's an amazing partner for the life sciences. And I learned all that firsthand as a staffer. I'm an attorney and I have an MPH, Master's in Public Health. And I started G2G because I met amazing entrepreneurs, many in the life sciences, health innovation space, doing great things, but not knowing how to access funding and navigate regulatory policy influence, relationship development to accelerate the growth of their business and bring innovations to patients faster. So I started in 2007, and since then we've raised 528 million. It's actually north of that now. It's around 531 million. So we just got an update on that. And we've got several millions pending in the current legislative process now as well. So we definitely raise a lot of non-dilutive dollars, and we do that by building relationships with agencies, the White House, and Congress. So it is a multi-pronged approach that we've been doing we're now going into our 18th year, actually. It's now 18 years. So we also do a lot of CMS reimbursement work, which is really important to think about as you are starting your business and innovating. You want to think about the pull through to the other end and the end user, and make sure that the patient really can have access, that it works, and that it will be covered. If you don't have coverage, it makes it very difficult to reach patients, as we all know. So we do all kinds of work to shape that regulatory process, work on reimbursement, other policy awareness campaigns, advocacy campaigns. We are bipartisan. We've got decades and decades and decades of experience on our team, from folks who have worked on Capitol Hill, lobbying Capitol Hill, in state houses, even in health departments, all over the spectrum, that makes us very good at what we do, and understanding how to navigate the process. So I talked about life sciences. Women's health is an area we've become very active in. There's a lot happening there with ARPA-H, for example, and other resources. We're located in a bunch of places. Our Midwest office is in Cleveland. We are also have an office in Columbus. We're active in Boston. We've been active in Pittsburgh for many years. I'm in DC with a bunch of my colleagues. So we're in a bunch of different places. We have national clients, locally based clients, many in the life sciences. And we have various affiliations with, we work with several bio chapters. We've got a great Midwest Bio Consortium that we launched around accessing government funding updates, and a whole process that we call our GBG reporting service, which is Government Bioscience Grants Report, that we put out each month. And it is a value add for your membership of these key bio chapters. So it's a great resource, tells you all the funding opportunities. And then we provide consultation and intel on where the funding's coming from, new opportunities that aren't even out yet, insights that we're hearing from whether it's the Hill or the agencies, et cetera. So it's a really great service if you're a member of those bio chapters. North Carolina Biotechnology Center, I was just down there actually speaking at their Warfighter Conference. Great organization we work with. Another one that's not listed here is ATCC, amazing resource for the nation when it comes to research. infectious disease work, vaccine development, a lot of different areas. But we have many partners, both on the for-profit, nonprofit side that we work with that we're very proud to be partnering with. And I think that gives us the background, my background. I want to thank you, welcome you again, and pass it over to my colleague, Greg.
Hi, thanks a lot, Liz. Appreciate that. My name is Greg Kapkar, and Liz mentioned our Midwest office in Cleveland. That's where I am actually headquartered. I have been with G2G for 7 years, and this will be my fifth MHSRS conference. I didn't go to two because they canceled it during COVID, but have been to everyone since. And my background is in health and human services, in the private sector, doing government relations for the better part of several decades, inside organizations out trying to leverage federal and state dollars for organizations, and have the pleasure of working with our team here at G2G that specializes in the life sciences, biosciences, high tech realm, and publishing our GBG report, and just working with some great companies who have just innovative technologies that are changing and saving lives across the continuum, whether it's in the military or in the civilian world. So we're going to get to it. And just always want to start with a disclaimer here that all of the opinions here are those of us, and any representation or view of DoD, not labels but graphics and things, does not constitute that they endorse any of this. So all of this is our views. So we can go to the next slide. So just want to do a quick at a glance of MHSRS. So this is the second series in a webinar series preparing for MHSRS. So we did one at the top of the year where we helped companies look at doing an abstract. So if this conference is of interest, you might want to think about submitting an abstract next year to be able to present at the conference, just like many companies are doing this year. So we did one early in the year, and then just a month ago we did another one. So this is kind of, I guess you could say, a third in the series. And some of this might be repetitive, but I just want to say that the conference is fast approaching. It is set to take place in August on the 26th through the 29th. It is in Kissimmee, Florida, in Orlando at the Gaylord Palms. Registration is now open, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, but we don't want to go to the next slide yet. But I do want to say this is the largest annual military medical conference of the year. There are others, and others are great too, but this is one all about research and development and connecting with that community. In the past couple years, since they started back up after COVID, the attendance is reaching close to 4,000 people. So this is the place to be if you want to connect with program managers, leadership, others in the industry, other researchers. This is a great place to do that. We'll talk a little bit about, I'll give a little flavor of what the sessions are like, but we want to spend the balance of today talking with Lloyd and getting his perspective and having that Q&A. But this conference, just to give you an idea of how large it is, has 70 breakout sessions. And there are several topic areas that I want to talk about just to give you a flavor of how does your company potentially fit into that. And we'll go through a slide here in a little bit. But this conference has an exhibit hall with hundreds of companies and from government and private sector. So the best way to work this conference is getting there if you can. If you can't go, G2G is willing to work with you to make sure that you can have some great information and make some connections to them. There are sponsored receptions. There's a plenary session. I mean, it's just a jam-packed 4 days of great information. So we can go to the next slide because I did mention earlier, registration's open. It will remain open probably until closer to the conference. I've never known them to actually close the registration. But what does close is the availability of getting space at the Gaylord. At the Gaylord, I know that the availability there is already closed. I think it closed the first day. They do have an overflow of hotels Plus, there are several hotels in the nearby area that you can stay at. But I guess the important thing here is that if you are intending to go, now is the time to go ahead and register. So we can go to the next slide. So I want to spend a little bit of time just on the breakout sessions and why this is a good conference for companies in the life sciences and health tech space. We've talked before, and I just want to mention, and before in past webinars, but if you've not attended the previous webinars, just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor that the conference is generally broken down into 4 focus areas. They focus on warfighter medical readiness, expeditionary medicine, warfighter performance, and return to duty. And then those general focus areas are then broken down into several categories. And this is where you start to hone in on and figure out where could your company potentially partner with the DoD, with other researchers, or where might there be potential funding opportunities for you. But just within warfighter medical readiness, they're looking at women's health, infectious disease prevention and treatment, psychological health and resilience, artificial intelligence and automation and decision support, predictive analytics. That is a huge topic area for the DoD right now. There's occupational and operational exposures, directed energy, sensory systems, and I'm not speaking to some specific breakout sessions that's on your slide right now. I just want to kind of give you a sense of how they move from these big 4 focus areas down into the detailed of how they come to 70 different breakout sessions at this conference. Within their focus area of expeditionary medicine, they're looking at things like forward surgical care. What could we bring to the point of injury and help those who are caring for injured warfighters for prolonged care? Burn management, pain management, traumatic brain injury, hemorrhage control and blood products, global health. Under warfighter performance, they're very interested in, again, in brain health, blast, physiological status, so sensors, musculoskeletal injury, and human performance. And when it comes to return to duty, the Defense Department is looking at psychological health and resilience, again, pain management. In this category, they're also looking at regenerative medicine and neuromusculoskeletal injury treatment. So those are how that's how the focus areas start to break down. And here are just a few examples of some of the breakout sessions that fall across all of those categories. So you see here, there's a session on cellular therapeutics and shock and trauma, women's health, health-focused updates, TBI, using AI and machine learning in military medicine, big data and machine learning, how to improve traumatic wound healing and recovery, far forward battlefield diagnostics and imaging, how to accelerate recovery from neuromusculoskeletal injury. We can go to the next slide. Regenerative medicine from the point of injury to a definitive point of care and beyond. Drug administration, regulation. So the FDA is doing a session on regulated activities and collaborations with the DoD. There's a whole session on the congressionally directed military research program and where funding opportunities are available. Prosthetics, updates in emerging infectious diseases, novel strategies for treating shock, blood, or blood failure. So when we talk to companies, they're like, I don't know that my company even fits within the DoD, but I hope that just kind of hearing about how they go from 4 general focus areas of warfighter performance, return to duty, how all of that gets distilled down into these very detailed breakout sessions and where your company could potentially fit for an interest in working with the DoD. Okay, so next slide. Okay, we want to spend the balance of the time hearing from and having a conversation with Dr. Lloyd Rose, who is a program manager at BioFab USA. And as Liz mentioned earlier, we have worked with Lloyd for many years now. Companies that we have worked with Lloyd, and he just brings a wealth of knowledge and experience of how what the DoD is looking for, how those partnerships could begin, how you even get your foot in the door. I mean, you can see here he's got an impressive year, nearly 20 years of federal service. He's been a product manager at USAMDA. He's worked on it as a portfolio manager in the regenerative medicine space. And he's a postdoctoral fellow at the U.S. Army Institute of Surgical Research in San Antonio. And he's got his PhD in microbiology and immunology. So we're just really excited to have Lloyd join us today. It's always a great discussion. And I know he has some slides for Army BioFab, and then we'll get to a discussion. So Lloyd, welcome and thanks for doing this. And the floor is yours, my friend.
All right. Thanks so much, Greg. And thanks, Liz, Greg, and Nadisha for setting all this up. It's always kind of the first time we did this a couple of years ago, it turned out to be a really great experience. And I think a lot of people told me later they found it very valuable. So hopefully that will be the case again. As Greg mentioned, I am currently the government program manager for BioFab USA, which is a manufacturing innovation institute that's sponsored by the Department of Defense. The mission of which is to make practical the scalable, consistent, cost-effective manufacturing of engineered tissues and tissue-related product technologies. So in other words, cell therapies, tissue-engineered therapies, or organ therapies, things of that nature. And just to explain the acronyms, BioFab USA is the institute, and the organization that runs that was awarded to run that institute is the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute, or Army with an I, as we have to say, so that we don't get confused about which Army we're talking about. They're based in Manchester, New Hampshire, and they have a big setup there, looking at ways in which they can help therapy developers automate their processes, close them so that they take the human error factor out so that we can actually make these therapies in a consistent and cost-effective way. So next slide. The basic intent of the Institute is to work in the pre-competitive space where a lot of the technologies that are needed to bring these therapies to their product transition threshold are not necessarily unique to the product themselves, but generally the way a lot of these therapies have been developed in the past is everybody reinvents the wheel because they want to make sure that they have complete control of the intellectual property of their entire process, even though the real key things that are involved in the intellectual property of your given product may actually be the things that are the unique items that I have highlighted here in the magenta color. So BioFab USA works with companies to try and help to provide develop and provide platform manufacturing, and to provide infrastructure, especially for small businesses that may not be able to afford that themselves at this point. They provide regulatory consulting, process development, incubator space, partnering with other members of the Institute. And basically, it's like the rising waters lift all ships, so that we can get more of these products to transition and threshold with a sound regulatory process, with consistent manufacturing processes, so that we don't have companies that just fail to get to that threshold before they're able to get to market. So anyway, having said all that, I'll just mention one other thing just in terms of my background. So when I was doing my postdoctoral fellowship at the Institute of Surgical Research down in San Antonio, that's kind of where I got introduced into regenerative medicine. And since that time, I have been working in the regenerative medicine space, either at the bench when I was a postdoc or in program management after that point. So overseeing a lot of the government's funding in the regenerative medicine space. That was through the Armed Forces Institute of Regenerative Medicine, as well as various other efforts. And those were all generally in the stage of early product development, and sometimes up into clinical trials. But the reason why the Institute, BioFab USA, became such an important component of that is the fact that so many people were still trying to produce these very complicated living products by hand, using a lot of human labor. So that's where the cost comes in, and the chance and the likelihood that you're not going to be able to get truly consistent products. So I've been in this regenerative medicine space throughout the entire time I've been working with the DoD, just at different levels of development. And so now I think we can probably proceed on. Oh, I'll have one more slide, excuse me. Next. So just to mention, the Institute is a membership-based organization, and these members are all over the country, as you can see here. There's approximately 200 members in 32 different states at this point. Although the Institute itself is based up in New Hampshire, the members are everywhere doing their work everywhere. So it's although the resources are really located up in New Hampshire, there's all sorts of ability to do distributed manufacturing and use those resources all across the country. And I think now that's the end of my slides, and happy to start the discussion.
Hey Aditya, before you jump in, I know that there's been a question in the Q&A, and I failed to mention at the top of my talk that if you have questions, please use the Q&A, and we will make the slides available, the slides and the recording available post this webinar. Somebody also asked if a company or participants aren't able to go to MHSRS, would there be information shared afterwards? And yes, G2G typically does a post-conference webinar. Plus, we'll also share information through reports and things that are posted to our website and blog. So yes, we will be sure to share that information. But I want to open up the floor, though, if anybody had any questions for Lloyd specifically about BioFab USA. And Lloyd, there was a question that came through about novel technologies, and I don't know if this can be outside your wheelhouse because it's specific to the VA systems. And they're asking, are the local VA systems able to make decisions on their own to conduct low-risk studies, or must it be run up the flagpole for decisions to be made at the national level? I don't know if you have any insights into that from your years of service or not.
In general, they are able to fund their own research programs. So the Office of Research and Development at the Veterans Health Administration, I do know some of the program managers there, and they run programs similar to the way the DoD does, in that they do fund. It's generally you have to be a VA affiliated researcher to get that funding, and then you can work with a VA affiliated researcher to participate in a research study. But they do not, as far as I know, still now, do not actually do open solicitations to extramural or researchers. But if you have colleagues who are VA researchers, then you can work with them.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Lloyd. Appreciate that. Aditya, over to you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so thanks again, Lloyd, for your background there and about BioFab. We're going to transition now into a discussion for about 10-15 minutes, just going over some common questions that folks might have about MHSRS, working with the DoD, and we'll pick Lloyd's brain a little bit here. And then, as Greg mentioned, if you have additional questions, please use the question and answer feature to put those in, and we'll field them towards the end of this session. So I'm going to quickly just stop sharing my screen so we can have a discussion. All right. So first off, Lloyd, I know Greg has sort of touched on this a little bit already, but a lot of folks are just really unfamiliar with this conference to begin with. They're probably, they know about your conventional scientific conference, and, MHSRS is also a scientific conference, but it is very, very different. Can you touch upon how it's different? And given, that the deadline to submit an abstract or to present is passed months ago, what are the benefits of just, going as an attendee?
Sure. Happy to address that. So yeah, MHSRS, in many ways, it will be familiar to people if they have been to a standard scientific conference. However, the focus of it is where the real difference is. And it's not just limited to one particular service, for example. There are going to be people there from Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, the Defense Health Agency, et cetera, et cetera. And they all have some specific areas of their own research interests. So what does providing medical care on an aircraft carrier look like? Well, it's a little bit different than for a land-based sort of healthcare. So some of those sort of things are interesting. But a lot of what sets things apart here is that in addition to simply getting a product, having a product that you're going to get through the FDA and put into the marketplace and commercialize, there are extra sets of requirements that the Army has that are typically related to logistics, getting your product where the soldiers are, that set this conference quite far apart. Because generally, if you're at Terminus, for example, or if some of these other places where vaccines are developed or whatever, you don't have to worry about the fact that your product is going to need to be shipped halfway across the world to a place that probably doesn't have sufficient power or cold chain resources. So this is a place where you can find out some of the additional things that challenge healthcare delivery and product development in the military.
You touched upon some of my other questions for that on the line, but we'll get to them soon enough. Going back to high level, say I'm a small company, I'm a CEO of a small company who's on the line. I'm really interested in going to this conference, but I can't send an entire delegation of folks. Who really should attend this conference? Should it be me as the CEO? Should it be someone who's on my science team, my salespeople? What would be your advice here as a program manager?
And there'll be some variation on this because it's going to a certain degree, it's going to depend on who you talk to. But a lot of people are going to be asking you technical questions. They're going to be asking you regulatory questions because they want to know what your product does and how it does it, how it's going to be regulated. Because we've had a lot of experience with figuring out how what the regulatory hurdles are going to be for the various products that are under development in the DoD, and they will be asking those sorts of questions. They're typically not going to be asking business development type questions, although as soon as I say that and you send your chief technology officer, they'll get a business development question. But I think more in general, I would make sure that whoever goes has some of the technical expertise because there'll be some questions related to that.
Very helpful. Sort of building off of that, for prospective attendees, what would you recommend they bring with them to MHSRS just to sort of aid in discussing about their technologies, their capabilities in terms of, collateral, materials, products? Any recommendations there?
It's always nice to have something for show and tell. And if the things you're developing are something that's small enough to travel with, I encourage you to bring those. Second best is probably to bring, like the elevator pitch sort of slide deck that's printed out or whatever. Or if you have it on your computer, that's fine too. You just want to have something that really is impactful and gives a clear impression to your audience where it fits into the health spectrum. Like, is this something that's going to be used by doctors in a fully staffed hospital, or is this something that's going to be used by a medic out in the field somewhere? And either way, having something in your hands to show does make a big impact.
So it's safe to say that if you're handing someone something, written like a paper, just keep it, to the point,
Yeah.
Streamline. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're going to hand out flyers or something, it just needs to be short. I mean, it just needs to be the single page type of flyer. And that may be self-evident, but most of the time we don't necessarily want to see a whole PowerPoint presentation printed out for us because we're probably not going to have time to spend on it.
Yeah, and I would just to sort of hit on that point. I mean, the types of interactions you're having here. I mean, obviously you have some prearranged meetings, but a lot of these conversations, correct me if I'm wrong, are happening sort of impromptu, like between sessions during coffee breaks. So you really want to be, have maximum impact in as short a time as possible, right?
Yeah, exactly. And just to expand on that a bit, I mean, this doesn't need to be the classical elevator pitch where you literally have 20 seconds before you're off the elevator at the next floor. I mean, at least I can only speak for myself in this, but I'm happy to spend several minutes. It's just that I can't, unless we arrange something in advance, I really don't have 30 minutes. So just that's a thought to think. But I'm always happy to set up other meetings if we don't have time right at that point to go through everything.
Yeah, that sort of ties into my next frame of question in terms of your work as a program manager. So what do program managers really, and I know you're at one institute, there's going to be hundreds of folks just like you at this conference. Broadly speaking, what do program managers really look for from industry at this conference and similar forums like it? What's the best way to, meet with folks like you, interact with you? You guys have your own booths at this forum.
Mm-hmm.
What are the roles like in terms of also relatively compared to program managers and say other fields that people might be familiar with? Could you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And so one of the on my intro slide, one of the things that got listed there was product manager. And so most of my actual colleagues are product managers, and they're doing product development, kind of in the stage, the late clinical stage. Well, yeah, any of the clinical stage, I guess. And a lot of them are looking for things that actually, can you do me a favor and repeat the question because I just lost my train of thought?
No worries. So what do program managers look for from industry? What's the best way to meet program managers at this forum? Do you guys have booths? What are you looking for? What are your roles as program managers, relative to the conventional definition of that term, other industries and things like that?
Yeah, so the product manager, and they will be at the booth. So USAMDA, the organization I'm in, has a booth there, and a large number of our product managers will be there. So a lot of what they're doing, and it's important to realize that when you're talking to product managers and program managers for the most part, this isn't a situation where you have a product right now that they are going to buy. So at least in my organization, we're not in what's called procurement. So we're not buying the things for the hospitals or that sort of thing. We're developing the products that are eventually going to go into the hospitals or go into the medics kits or any of that sort of stuff. So when you're talking to the product managers in particular, it's very important that you give them the impression that you've thought through some of the challenges that are going to be inherent in bringing medical care to the wounded warrior out in the field in particular. Now, if your product is suitable for the hospital, that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to the product managers because we also need those products. But when you're thinking about, I have this great product, it'll be perfect for the military, you may be right, but the considerations that are inherent in fielding something in the military mean that you're going to get some questions that you may not anticipate. And some of those are going to be, do you need a cold chain? Because it may not be available. Is it suitable for being shipped in an airplane? Does it need a power source when it gets there? Does it need clean potable water? Because that may be in short supply. Is it big and bulky? Because if it's going into, if we're putting it out in the field, in all likelihood, it is replacing something that is already in the medics kit or in the field hospital. But so it has to not only be suitable for replacing those things, it can't cost a lot more. It can't be 5 times as big. It can't weigh 2 times as much. Because even if it's better as a technology, if it fails in some of those other parameters, you're probably going to have a hard time convincing the DoD to ever buy it. So these are just questions that are going to be asked, and if you're prepared for some of those, that'll sit you in a good spot.
No, that's very helpful. And just to sort of circle back on a point you made earlier, you talked about requirements. Is that what you're referring to here?
Yeah.
So how do those requirements sort of get put together? Like, how do they change? How do people become aware of them? Is it only through talking to folks like you? Is there some way that folks could educate themselves on that, like before they even get to the conference or meetings like this? Any advice there?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a hard one because typically what happens is you find out the requirements when you start talking to the program and product managers. So what'll happen during this is such a confusing process, and I really don't expect most people to ever truly understand it if they're not deeply embedded in it. But basically, and when we're doing early research, we put out solicitations for grants kind of like you may be familiar with the NIH, and CDMRP does this, for example, and that's open to anybody. It has to address military relevant things, but it's not tied to these requirements. However, once we get into an advanced development phase where we're starting to look at the manufacturing processes and the clinical trials and the regulatory stuff, what we actually have to have is documentation from the Army or the Defense Health Agency or whoever it is you're working for that says, we have determined that in fact we need this particular capability met. And once we have those requirements, we can then put out a solicitation. But those sorts of solicitations are extremely specific. They have well-defined thresholds and objectives for their parameters. And then that's kind of when you see our solicitations, usually through something like MTech or FedBizOps or things of that nature. So yeah, the requirements that ends up making things take a lot longer. But you can always ask any of the product managers about that when you're there, and I encourage you to, because they'll be able to tell you in their specific space, whether it's burns or vaccines or anything like that, what those requirements look like and what sort of parameters have been set up for the product development.
No, that's very helpful for folks to know. Um, you touched a little bit on you mentioned in passing the DHA, the Defense Health Agency, and we've been hearing a lot about how over the last couple of years there's been this transition of research and development, product development away from the individual service branches more towards a centralized structure with the DHA. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How that ongoing reorganization has impacted what's being prioritized by the DoD? What are you funding? Things of that nature, if you can.
Sure. I'll do my best, but it's as confusing to us sometimes as it is to people who are on the outside. So effective May 5th, our organization transferred out of the U.S. Army to the Defense Health Agency. So the Defense Health Agency is a joint enterprise, meaning it's not specific to a given service. It includes priorities that are outlined by Army, Navy, Air Force, et cetera. So it's not so much that we're now focusing on different things. It's that before, if the Army was working on a particular set of products to handle a particular condition, this one may be relevant to the Navy and the Air Force as well, and perhaps even to the civilian side where DHA has some focus, like the military treatment facilities and so on and so forth. And since that is in some of these programs are inherently broad across all the services, it just made more sense, and the Congress and required this based on that assessment, that these programs should be transitioned to the Defense Health Agency. So not all programs and not all military labs got transitioned to the Defense Health Agency if the research that was being done in those particular programs was extremely specific to a service. So I mentioned it earlier, if you're doing, if you're developing healthcare delivery products for, submarines or aircraft carriers, or if you're talking about en route care on Air Force, planes, that sort of stuff is not inherently joint. And for the most part, those programs stayed with those individual services. But for the rest of us, all it means is that we just have a different chain of command for the most part. And our intent is that we're still going to be working with all of the services to the extent that a given program is important to more than one service. We're still in the midst of this. So although we have shifted over to a different chain of command, we're now in the Defense Health Agency, there's still a lot of work to be done. So I guarantee you things as they look right now will look a little bit different in a year from now, and probably even more different than that 5 years from now.
I have to say that's probably the clearest explanation anyone has given me so far. So good on you for coming up with that. I guess we'll close it on our formatted discussion, and then we'll go on to I'll just ask one more question. You've been going to MHSRS for a long time. You've been a program manager in service for quite some time. So can you just touch upon some of the trends or the evolution that you've seen in what the DoD is prioritizing in terms of military medicine and health R&D work over the years? Sort of where are we now, and like where do you see us going? I mean, I've heard a lot of talk about how we're moving to new paradigms of conflict for our warfighters. How does that impact, what we're prioritizing in military medicine, and what should people be looking for?
Yeah, it impacts it a lot. So one thing that the first time I went to MHSRS was 2013. And so I've been going every year in which COVID didn't prevent it. So when I first started, we were still kind of in the final stages of Iraq and Afghanistan. And a lot of the research that was being done as a result of that conflict was focused on the injured service members who were coming back. Because one thing that was a great success from a medical standpoint in those conflicts was the degree to which we were able to save lives that previously would not have been saved, the so-called golden hour and stopping hemorrhage and all that sort of stuff. But that meant that we were saving people with pretty severe injuries who in prior conflicts probably would not have survived. And they were coming back with lost limbs and burns and so on and so forth that really required some medical treatments that weren't really available. And so there was for example, a big focus on regenerative medicine and restoring wounded warriors. And as we transitioned out of that conflict, the priorities started changing. And that's when you probably have heard some of the discussions around what our next conflict is like, because the Army, the DoD has an inherent problem of always preparing for the last conflict. And so the effort here is what is the next conflict going to look like? Is it really going to look like Iraq and Afghanistan? Or are we talking about Russia and China? Because at that stage, we're no longer able to absolutely control the battle space. We're going to be challenged in every arena in which we would be fighting, from communications to air control to being able to evacuate people in a short period of time. And that raises some challenges related to what sort of medical care is necessary and it can be provided when we don't have absolute control of airspace and so on and so forth. So that changed the focus of research towards forward critical care. So things that medical things that are going to be put out in a medic's hand or at a field hospital, where you're not going to have all the water, all the power, all the cold chain sort of things that you're going to need. And you may not be able to evacuate people in a timely fashion. So if you have these severe injuries, what can we do for these people in a situation where they're not getting to a fully staffed hospital situation for days, perhaps weeks? I mean, these are amazingly difficult challenges. But what that meant is now we're not funding regenerative medicine sort of research. We're funding critical care and acute care sorts of things. Like, we need to figure out how we're going to stop people from bleeding to death. If you have a severe burn that's going to start causing sort of systemic immune disruptions, is there something we can do for them? Can we cover these wounds with something that's going to keep them alive and not suffering the likelihood of dying from those wounds over periods of days? All of this stuff is somewhat cyclical. We are starting to see, for example, some funding coming back into regenerative medicine. I think we've kind of passed the low point, for example, of that space. But overall, the DoD continues to have its primary focus on acute care sorts of situations. And it will probably be that way for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
No, that's very interesting and very helpful. I mean, I think everyone at the DoD is trying to shift their thinking and how they operate internally, and potential performers will also have to shift how they
Yep.
see themselves fitting with the stuff that the DoD is doing as it evolves over the next couple of years or decades, as you indicated. So yeah, those are really great insights. I think we want to just touch on some of the audience questions. I see there's a couple in here. We'll go through them. And if you haven't typed a question in, please feel free to do so and we'll try and get to it. Okay, some of these are a little specific, but we'll try our best here. So from one question, so my company has a technology that can detect sepsis from whole blood in about an hour. Is that something that BioFab or maybe another institute can help us with in terms of scaling up manufacture? And in terms of, what would be, if you're trying to scope out when you're attending sessions of the conference, are there particular sessions or receptions, things like that could be recommended? I know that's a lot and probably not able to answer it on the fly, but any insights there?
Yeah, so I will say that is a topic of interest to the DoD for sure, because obviously the only way, most people who get sepsis die from it. If you don't catch it early and take immediate action, it's probably too late. So that is something that the DoD has invested in and is looking for. So there are definitely sessions. There's probably a few that Greg showed a little bit earlier that are relevant. Shock and trauma, lots of blood products and things of that nature. I would definitely look at those sessions and they'll print out the abstracts ahead of time. So you should be able to look at those as well to see if there's anything of specific interest. But those sort of sessions I would look for, and then try to talk to those moderators. Those moderators, even if they themselves are not necessarily the person you would end up talking to, will be able to point you to the right people, just because that's their session. They've seen all the work that's going on in it.
No,
you asked about BioFab, and I'll say the two institutes, there are two DoD institutes that are really working in the biological space, and mine, which is focused more on the cell therapies and tissue injury, and there's another one that's focused on synthetic biology and using microorganisms to produce products. It's not exactly the best fit with what you're asking there, so that may not be the right place. I'm not sure otherwise. I don't have any good advice otherwise for that.
No, but yeah, as you indicated, I mean, just attending the conference, talking to moderators of sessions is a great approach, even if they're not the right person. Like you said, chances are they have half a dozen people in their network who might be the right person to talk to you. So definitely good advice there. Um, let's see, looking at the other questions we have. So let me see if the best way I can phrase this. So if we have a private practitioner who's having success with a cash pay wellness modality with veterans struggling with PTSD or concussion, how do you suggest we approach, I'm guessing, approach DoD, folks who are, involved with active warfighters about doing, studies with the DoD to, with the eventual goal of expanding access and gaining insurance coverage through the TRICARE system. And again, I know that's a very specific question, but any tips, any pointers there about how that sort of structures that this person could use?
Yeah, sure. And to some degree, it's similar to what I answered in the previous question. But I'll add, going to the USAMDA booth, for example, one of the program management offices we have is Warfighter Brain Health, and they're the ones who are kind of looking at advanced development of products that are in the PTSD TBI space. So I would talk to them about where their programs are, because I don't have direct information about what sort of things they are and aren't funding. But they may have solicitations out, or maybe planning on them in the future, and can tell you where to look for them. In terms of if the easier type of funding, where you're not having to worry about whether a particular program has got requirements and is putting out very specific solicitations, is always CDMRP, because and also, there are broad agency announcements through our various research programs that are potentially worth considering. TBI, PTSD, brain health sorts of things are something that has seen absolutely zero decline in research funding since, as far as I can tell anyway, since the Afghanistan and Iraq conflict. So that is one area that you'll be able to find some research funding there. And even if it's only in the form of grants, that may actually be easier than signing on official contracts with the government to produce products at this stage. It's kind of one of the, lots of different options.
No, that's helpful. I think we have two more questions and then we'll start wrapping it up. So let me see. Is there a dedicated networking partnering system for the conference? I'm not quite sure what that.
I know what they're talking about.
Okay.
So a lot of the conferences that I end up going to, like Advanced Therapies Week and the Cell and Gene meeting on the Mesa and things of that nature, they set up an app that allows you to partner one-on-one with various people and set up meetings. And MHSRS has never done that. And my hunch is, at least the way they currently set these meetings up, it's probably not something they're going to do. The fact that they only are able to announce these meetings and allow registration like a month and a half before it actually starts means you lose a lot of the opportunities to set these meetings up in advance through those apps. I would also be a little worried about how effective those apps would be in this particular meeting. Just the organizations that have been doing this for a long time have very well thought out plans for this, but there would be a pretty steep learning curve, I think, for DoD to implement one of those.
No, that's fair. I remember using an app like the one you're talking about for a different conference, I think for BARDA, and it had mixed results at best. So yeah, I hear you there. So the last question, I think I can also add some flavor to this. So if you can only attend for a few days, and the person asking the question is in the women's health field, like what would be the recommendations in terms of sessions you could attend, especially if it's not, a women's health focus session? Are there some specific topics, where there's, nexus with women's health that this person could look out for in terms of picking out sessions?
Yeah, I'm not exactly, I don't necessarily, I haven't looked through the list of all 70 sessions in great detail to know if there's something besides a women's health specific topic area that would be the best one to go. I do typically recommend going to the first day plenary sessions if you're able to. To a certain extent, you get a lot of high level policy type discussion. where they may actually address some things like that. It's different every year, so I can't say for certain, but I usually find those fairly useful to get a kind of broader understanding of where the DoD is looking. Um, Other than that, it's really just a question of look through when they actually make available the abstract list. It's going to be a huge list, so that's a kind of a heavy lift to go through and find individual talks that may be relevant, but certain sessions are going to be more obvious places to look than others.
Yeah, just to add some additional flavor on that, there is a specific women's health and readiness session that is on that Monday. So the same evening that the plenary session is being held. So that's in the afternoon, early evening on Monday, the 26th. I would say in terms of other topics that potentially could link, I mean, you have readiness, military readiness, return to duty, anything with those sorts of names in the title of a session. And it's still pretty bare bones. The agenda that's been put out is still pretty bare bones, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
But I think looking for things like that would impact the readiness and return to duty of female warfighters to the field, those are the sorts of things you should be looking out for. So yeah, I think that concludes our question and answer and discussion session. I'm just going to bring up my slides again, and then we can wrap this up. If you could all bear with me for 1 sec.
I can jump in since I think I'm going over the final tips, and then we'll close this out right on time. So as you're all preparing, just take to heart everything that you heard from Lloyd Rose, because he is the expert. The number one thing is tracking the opportunities and conferences beyond MHSRS. So definitely, come prepared to this conference, use what you learned today, but think about these other conferences we touched on. There's the BARDA conference, there's the SOMA conference. There are other conferences throughout the year that are great opportunities to network, build relationships, gain insights, etc. You want to make sure you've got that one pager ready, as Lloyd talked about. You don't want a full PowerPoint. You don't want to overwhelm people. You're not going to have a lot of time with them. You have more than 20 seconds, but it's probably more like 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes at time. So you want to come prepared with your one pager that sums up what's the problem that you're addressing, your unique solution, and what's the results that you think you can produce if you were partnering with the DoD, or if you were given funding, or whatever it is that you're looking for from the DoD. So that quick, crisp communication is super helpful. And having some visual, if you have a device that you can actually show, or visual on that one pager, is helpful as well. You want to understand the program goals, the intent of the word mechanism, and the criteria. And that comes with these program announcements. And Lloyd touched on this with the CDMRP program in particular, Congressionally Directed Military Research Program. These other grants that are coming out from others like ARPA-H, DARPA, these other sources. Just make sure that you're really reading everything about the program, what they're trying to fund, so that you are aligning as much as possible. And you're also not wasting time applying for something that you don't really have a shot at. So it's also a major time saver to do that too. Developing these relationships with program managers is so key. That's why we go to this conference, and I've been going, it sounds like maybe a little bit longer than you, Lloyd, which cracks me up because I think of you as the expert. But in any case, we've all been going for many years, and we've seen how valuable it is to develop relationships, to listen to what program managers are focused on. What are their gaps? What requirements do they have? What challenges can you help them solve? That's super, super important. So program managers are really key in giving you insight and guiding you in the right directions. Following deadlines, budget guidelines, all of that is an obvious. Reading the directions, very obvious when you're applying. Make sure you do all these registrations with grants.gov, SAM, etc. before the deadline. That's really important. You want to keep your pre-applications and quad charts short, simple, to the point. Very, very important. Just as in verbal communication, you want to get right to it. You don't want to get lost in the science because while people are very intelligent, obviously, they know what they're doing. Many folks are gatekeepers, or they're overseeing so many different areas that they're not going to have that specialty that you have. So just keep it simple and to the point. That's super important. You can look up past award recipients. That can give you guidance as you're making a submission to CDMRP, for example. We've talked a lot about CDMRP. the broad agency announcement. The BAAs are also a good opportunity, both through DoD, through MTech, Army, MCDC. A lot of these consortiums are having those opportunities, collaborating with the military, doing CRADAs or MTAs, military transfers. These are just agreements where you're not getting funded, but you are developing a partnership and that trust that can lead to future funding opportunities and much bigger, broader things that you can do together. Being persistent, building relationships, and aligning with opportunities is super important. This conference provides that opportunity to develop relationships, share your information on your innovation, but then also learn and hear the priorities that the military has right now, that the VA has, that specific program managers have. It's just a phenomenal opportunity for you. So I cannot recommend the conference enough, which brings me to the next slide. So we are here to help you, to guide you through the conference. If you want us to work for you, we can represent you at the conference, or we can go together to the conference and line up meetings for you. We like to line up meetings ahead of time and then work the conference because we have a team at G2G. We divide and conquer and make sure we're hitting up different program managers, different leaders within DoD, VA, and some folks from HHS are there as well. Just to make sure that we're maximizing participation, we're elevating your work and getting you in front of the right people. And then there's follow-ups after to make sure that we turn that into what's the next action item, right? We don't just want a nice conversation, but we want to turn that into an action. So that is what we do. And so just shoot me an email. I'll pop it in the chat box here if you're interested in doing that. I would say if we are going to do that, we would need to get started by no later than next week. So let us know by the end of this week. If that's of interest to you, happy to work with you on that. And I think that is it. I'll pass it back to you, Aditya, while I put my email in here. Okay, I guess I'll take it back. Thank you all for dialing in. I really appreciate it, and have a great day and hope to see you at MHSRS. Bye.